everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 271, The Next 30 Days. I started thinking about the next 30 days when I realized that we were already a couple of days into March, and there are around 40-ish days to the end of the semester, between 40 and 50. And one of the things I started thinking about with that is how many faculty that I work with that kind of give up in March or they panic because they realize we're closing in on the end of another academic year. Sometimes we have a lot of projects that aren't completed. We have work that's unfinished. And sometimes, because of the way spring break lands, particularly at U.S. institutions, a lot of times it does end up somewhere in March. Once we get to that spring break point, some faculty don't come back from that with, for example, some time to work on scholarship, either because they're grading a lot, they've just given up, they said, well, I'm just going to wait until the summer, I'm too overwhelmed right now. There are also lots of award ceremonies and end of year activities at our institutions. So you might be, going to some programming there. Depending on where you are in terms of family life. If you have a family, you might also be kind of bumping up against a lot of night events for children and so on. And so the end of spring tends to be a pretty busy time for academics. And I would argue it's probably one of the least productive times for academics. And so I met with a client the other day and we kind of talked about how to think through working in this very kind of tempting time to sort of give up and just say, oh, I'll put it off for later. And so what we did was we made next, what are we going to do in the next 30 days? And I decided to make one myself and walk through a little bit of some of the decision making I'm thinking about now as I close on the end of the semester. Hopefully some of these strategies could help you. If you are only audio listening and you're not viewing it, I am showing an entry that I made in my online notebook, Penzu, where I just track down what am I doing between today when this episode is being recorded, so March 12th and April 12th. This is getting recorded in the spring of 2026. And where I am in the next 30 days is I really looked at what are some deadlines I have, what has to be completed, submitted, I owe it to somebody, but also what is the most important priority to me? And some of these things line up. So when you last left me talking about some writing that I'm working on a book. And my final manuscript is due at the beginning of April, but probably most likely April 7th because that falls after the Easter holiday. And just because that's kind of a time where a lot of people take time off. I know that it's most likely that would be the day that it would get submitted. So to me, that's my most important goal, but it also lands in the next 30 days. So it's kind of close to the end of that 30, but it's still landing in there. The other thing that I have is I have one all-day workshop and then one 2-hour workshop, both coming up. One is on the 19th, one is on the 26th of March, and they both require some slides. The other one that's all day does require some travel logistics and some things that need to be worked out. So really all of these three things, I'm very fortunate they all fall in different weeks. I don't have all three things happening in one week. But they are all falling in the next 30 days. And at least with the manuscript, I still have work to do that needs to happen in the next 30 days. And I'm also bumping up against some travel where I'm gone for a week and some other things. I also am somewhat aware of something that falls outside the 30-day period, or my next 30 days, but I do need to submit an application for an award by May 1st. So even though that's not in the next 30 days, it's something I can't totally ignore because it's going to happen before the end of the spring semester. So just in that overview, I'm just looking at things that absolutely have to get completed, but also what's really important here. And as I mentioned, that lined up for me. What you're not seeing or hearing about in my next 30 days, I have plenty of other things that could happen in there. I still have a half-finished article. I'm going to owe a book chapter coming up sometime late in the summer. And even though I have been working on those things, I'm putting everything aside to just focus on what has to happen in the next 30 days. And I'm finding that having that tunnel vision and that focus, even if it means I'm only working on one thing, is really, really important. So one of the things I also know about my schedule is that once I do a workshop on the 19th, then I'm down to just two things. I have an all-day workshop, and then I have to submit my final manuscript. Once I do my all-day workshop event on the 26th, between the 27th and March 7th, or in April 7th, I don't have anything else but to work on that final manuscript. I also don't have a lot of days in there, just the way that it kind of laid out, but that's how it is. So the other thing that I did was I identified when are my working days in my next 30. In my next 30-day period, what are some days I can actually get some work done? And by that, I'm looking at anything that allows me time bigger than an hour. So I went and looked, and I don't have much. So I pretty much have 7 days, the equivalent of seven kind of working days. One is tomorrow, and then I have a week between the 23rd and the 27th, and then I have one day on the 29th. The reason why I don't have big chunks of time on the other days is I have some travel. There's also some holidays in there, and it's just kind of a busier period. So why I did that is I wanted to get very real with myself and say, what do you have left? So that way I'm not squandering those extra, those times that are bigger blocks to do some work. The other thing that I started looking at is where can I get at least an hour of work on the other days within the next 30? So this is something else I would encourage you to look at. And one of the things I started doing was getting rid of any meetings that are not essential for me to be there. I have a couple meetings that come around once in a while. They're like monthly meetings. If I've been to all the other ones, it's not a big deal for me to miss the one in March because I need to get some of these other things done. So I'm making some of those types of decisions. Other things that I have moved, I moved a dentist appointment to after this 30-day period. I don't advocate that if you're having dental troubles, but in my case, I just said, could it wait 30 to 45 days? Yes. It's getting moved. So I mentioned this before, and Megan McIntosh, she's called the PhD of Productivity. She did a lot of really good work, and she had this really great workshop. I think I've mentioned it at one point before. It was called Being Scarily Overwhelmed. Like if you're, just all the things you have to do are really starting to weigh on you. And the best piece of advice she said in that session was, if it can wait, let it. That's it. If it can wait, let it. So I use that all the time to make decisions. So in the next 30 days, if anything can wait, I'm going to let it wait because I need to get these other things done. So that's something else I'm looking at. Another thing that I'm looking at, and this is depending on where you are, a strategy that you can employ based on what you can do. But the faculty member that I've been working with when we talked about our 30-day plan, this person is really bumping up against a tight deadline, very tight. Very, very tight. And so one of the things that we talked about was the idea of taking a sick day. And what we mean by that is that this person has a Tuesday, Thursday schedule. On their Thursdays, they teach several classes, but they also had a lot of time around these classes to get some work done. And we just talked about the idea of, what if you gave the students the day off and you gave them an out of class assignment, the equivalent of a sick day? You don't have to actually tell them you're sick, whatever works for you to get things completed. But just the idea that even though you have an obligation that you have some face time, depending on your circumstances and what else has to happen, we know we can't do all of the things. So this might be a time that you need to say, all right, for that particular day, I'm going to give an out of class assignment. It is what it is, and we're going to go from there. So that's something that we looked at. I also looked at some general administration type work that needs to happen, if not in the next 30 days, probably before the end of the semester. So for example, for Defend, Publish, and Lead, we always put out some free summer programming, and we're doing a lot of workshops and workshop specials. So faculty developers, we're running a really cool workshop just for $225. So if you want to bring us to campus, as many faculty as you want, that's one that I know we have some things that have to get put up for that. So I know I need to do that. And I also need website updates and some other things. So I don't want to wait too long, but I do need to do those before the end of the semester. But to me, that's something that can wait till after that 30-day period when I've completed both sets of my slides and I've submitted my final manuscript. So I hope this helps you kind of think through the idea of next 30. If 30 is too overwhelming for you to think about the next 5 days. So or the next 3, if you're really, really overwhelmed, Because one of the things that's really helpful is that as you hone in at looking at each day individually, you may be able to see some spaces in there where there's a meeting you don't need to go to, or maybe you had really planned to run errands, or that's the time that you normally grocery shop, but maybe this week you're going to do a grocery delivery because you just need to get some bandwidth in there. Doing kind of a next 30 audit is a really good way to see what's happening with your time and see what kinds of choices you need to make. It may mean that some of those projects get pushed out to a later period. Another thing that you can consider as we close the session is to think about could any of this work get farmed out to somebody else? So one thing that I know, for me to submit that final manuscript on the 7th, probably a day or two before that Easter weekend, I'm going to have to hand that off to someone to do my, APA formatting, or I have to see if it's APA or Chicago. I don't even remember, but I need to make sure that that's taken care of. I'm going to farm that out to someone that is quicker at that than me. So yes, it's going to be one of our defend and publish coaches. I'm, like I said, I'm not only the owner of the company, I'm a client, as you always hear in some of those things, but I do hire our own coaches to do that kind of work because I know, within less than 1 month, I won't have time to get to the nitpicky formatting things. I need to get the big things completed. And I also want to have someone do a final read and a final edit on that. So if that's something that you're looking for to buy some bandwidth, please reach out to us for coaching hours. We're doing a lot of that with dissertations right now, book submissions. Some people are starting to work on, say, tenure applications and all that. If there's anything that you need from us, please don't hesitate to reach out at Christine at defendpublishlead.com, and I will put some of those links to the resources in the show notes. Happy writing this week.